Sweet. Okay. So I was going to talk about tips and tricks about email, and then I kind of thought about it, and I was like, that's a really boring and unjiffable title. So instead I'm going to talk about the circle of email life, because that's a far more interesting and far more jiffable title, and anyone who knows me knows I like a jiff. So I'm going to kind of chat through some of my tips and tricks and things that people should really know about everything to do with the circle of email life, from design through to dev, an editor experience, testing, and analytics. And first we're going to kick off with design. So first things first, why does design actually matter when it comes to an email? Really, when it comes down to it, it's all about making people do whatever the thing is that you want them to do. And when that's an email, it's kind of about keeping people's attention in one spot long enough to get them to push the button. Everyone knows I love a GIF, so here we go. Get ready for the ride. If we pick an email and start looking to break it down into what some of the core components are that you'll typically find in most of the emails that you look at, taking this Allbirds example for the sake of the exercise, some of your key components that you'll typically find are things like your subject, your pre-header, your sender details, a logo section, hero section, your body content, your call to action, and your footer. These elements might appear in different emails in different ways. They might appear in different orders. They may appear multiple times in a single email. This is obviously a really short one because it's hard to fit a long email into a limited vertical space. So we're going short. But the key thing really is that in a well-designed email, every single one of those components is going to be there to fill a specific purpose. It's going to be there for a reason. If we take that into the real world, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have a really long email. Doesn't mean that a long email is inherently bad. Also doesn't mean that a short email is inherently good. See a few cringes. Yeah.
With the long emails, we've just sent one out and there's quite a lot of imagery and stuff like way down it, and it's going into people's like promotional folders in Gmail.
Yeah.
If we cut that back, removed a bunch of images, that could be a way to kind of help deliver the next one, or what? What do you recommend?
That's a really challenging question. So Google's inbox placement filters kind of look at a lot of criteria, and the only way to really be sure would be to test it. So strip out a bunch of the images, send it to a couple of people in the office who have Gmail, and give that a go. The challenge is there's so many different elements within the email that could result in it getting put into the promotions tab. Part of it's about language, part of it's about imagery, part of it's about the overall size, a little bit of it's sender reputation as well. Do you have anything you want to add on?
I think that there might be in the SMTP header, which is like the envelope that you don't see as a user, there might be a flag which indicates that it's a bulk email. I'm not sure, but I think that might be something that Google looks at.
Yep. Yeah.
So there may not be anything you can do for it to not go into promotional, because Marketo will be adding that header.
Yeah.
And the mailbox providers, some of them make that mandatory for bulk senders.
Yeah, they
Things
do.
like Gmail, a lot of the web-based platforms like that will probably use a lot of that criteria, which Gmail still will. But the difference with Gmail is that Gmail tends to has a tendency to look at things from an individual level rather than a group level.
Yeah.
So if people are engaging with this content, it's more likely to place that in the main inbox than it would be in the promotions folder.
Yeah.
The best way for people to look at ensuring that it is hitting the inbox is to actually tell Gmail to pull it out of the promotions tab and into that, so into the actual main inbox. And there are a few ways that we can sort of help entice people to do that through messaging, but yeah, we can chat about that a little bit later if you like.
It's a big topic.
It's a really interesting one though, and I think there's also a little bit of an inherent perception by a lot of businesses that to land in the promotions tab is a bad thing, and I don't think that's necessarily always true. Some tactics that some people will try to implement to get out of it are a little bit black hat, and you want to avoid any of those ones because they can have other unintended consequences. But yes. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that a long email is a bad email, doesn't necessarily mean that a short email is a good email, doesn't mean that you can't use lots of text. Apparently when I go behind my back that doesn't work. And it doesn't mean that you can't use lots of images. All of these emails are literally pulled from a website called Really Good Emails, because they're really good emails, except for the short one, which obviously was a gimmick for the sake of comedy. So, if we break it down, going back to that Allbirds example, what was their actual objective with this email? Should be pretty obvious. It's push the button. How do they do it? Well, there's a couple of things that they've done really well in this email. It's a couple of things that are really good. The first one is the hero image. They've used a pretty subtle GIF, which draws your eye into the email and grabs the reader's attention, but doesn't distract from the overall objective of the piece, which is a bit of a balancing act. One of the other benefits to having it be pretty subtle is that it's not going to have a massive load speed issue, which is definitely a challenge with using GIFs. They also have pretty generous padding, so around the top of the email you can see, around the bottom of the email there's a decent bit of negative space. They're also not pulling the text right to the edges of the email. Basically overall it means it doesn't feel overly stuffy or heavy or crammed to the reader. They've made the design pretty cohesive, so they're pulling some of that colour down from the bottom of the hero section through the text all the way down to the button, and that helps draw your eye through and make the whole thing feel like it's really a whole thought through piece, not just chunked together. And then at the bottom the CTA that they're using is done with, it's pretty simple actually, it's just black, but it's high contrast to the environment and it does stand out. Finally, they've bottom weighted the whole email, so basically it feels like the center of gravity in the email is pretty low and it kind of sucks you down to the part of it where they're really trying to get your attention. But there's one thing that Allbirds have done really badly in this email, and it's a thing that makes me really sad. Can anyone guess what it might be? Not that. Whoop. The entire email is image based, and it's based on a single image. So there is no live text in this email, and the design breakdown doesn't match the build breakdown. Why does this make me feel this way? Well, there's a few key reasons. If I can stop putting this thing behind my back, we'll get to them. So, first things first, if the images don't load or someone doesn't have images turned on, there is basically no message conveyed to me. There is no meaning to this email. And I can't see the CTA. So if your objective here is to get me to click a button and I can't click the button, you've failed. Next thing is that the alt text basically does very little to convey any meaning. The alt text just says unearth our commitment. It's kind of fluffy marketing terminology that doesn't tell me as a reader anything. Combine those two factors, what that means is that this email is inaccessible. So users with visual impairments and those using screen readers will get nothing out of this. And why is that a problem? First things first, it's becoming increasingly likely that things like inaccessible email and web design in the US is going to be grounds for I'm going to forget the word now, grounds for discrimination suits. So that's serious. Second to that, it's also becoming increasingly likely that accessibility is going to be a factor in deliverability soon. So if you are not making your emails accessible, A, lawsuits, fun. B, deliverability problems, also a lot of fun. So, not great. And part of what makes me saddest about this is that it is not a complicated design. It would have been so incredibly easy to build this out with HTML, and it would have been a far better experience for users. So, overall not ideal. A lot of other things they're getting right though.
Will you feed back to them?
I want to. I keep thinking I will. At some point I might send them an email and just be like, guys, I'm repping your shoes literally right now. But yeah, key things to remember. You should be really ruthless about your email design. Know what your email's objective is, and feel free and be pretty ruthless about cutting anything that doesn't serve the objective. Next thing is to be creative. Maintaining brand consistency is really important, but predictability is really boring. The minute that your readers start to predict your email content and your email design is when your engagement is going to start to tank. So mix it up a little bit every now and then. And like my good friend Bob Ross, there's no such thing as mistakes, there's just happy little accidents. Also, don't forget to look at the big picture. Modules might look good alone, but what's more important is that they look good together as a whole. One good module will not save an overall shitty email, unfortunately. And make sure you give your content room to breathe. It's really important to get comfortable with negative space. Most of the time I'm telling my users, when you think you've got enough padding, double it, and then we're getting somewhere. So get really comfortable with it. And finally, everything has to have a purpose. So if you're switching alignment, if you're switching your font size, your font color, if you are adding a new module, removing a module, anything like that, every single thing in your email has to be there for a reason. And if you're changing things, make sure you do it in a logical way that's consistent. Otherwise, it just looks messy. So, that's design. Next is dev. And I talked to Josh about potentially putting, which anyone who knows email dev will laugh at, falling GIFs of tables in here, but I couldn't find any GIFs of tables falling, so imagine all you see is tables. We'll roll with that. What's the first thing you need to know about email dev? It's that it's kind of complicated. That's basically all I got for you. It's not realistic really for me to say I'm going to teach all of you HTML and you're going to walk out of here totally fluent and everything's going to be fine. That's not what's going to happen, that's not feasible. What I am going to chat through though is a couple of key things I think it's really important for everyone to understand about email dev, regardless of whether they're a developer or not. First thing is that email development is not the same thing as web development. They are very different things. Email is really a whole other beast, and lots of people make jokes about the fact that email code looks like it's from the 90s. The reason is it kind of has to be in order to work, because when a web developer only has a handful of things to contest against when they are building new pages, sort of, browsers, screen sizes, those sorts of things, Litmus estimates that email developers have over 15,000 variants to contest with. 15,000 is a lot. It's more than really is feasible for any of us to deal with. So email development is complicated. And if you want to get great and truly responsive and consistent emails, you have to be prepared to invest in dev for them. So when it comes to Marketo, that means that custom templates are going to be your best friend. It's not to say that everyone needs a custom template to start with, but it is to say that Marketo starter templates are just that. They are starters. When you get to a certain point in the maturity scale, you'll start to find them incredibly frustrating. But that frustration doesn't have to be a bad thing. Frustration helps show that you are getting to a point where you have a better understanding of what you do want out of it, and are probably in a better position to start figuring out what a custom template might look for you, and everyone's needs for a custom template are different. So, what does it mean if you get a custom template? Well, for starters, you get to fully customize the look and feel of your email. So, if you want things to be different background colors, different fonts, different like widths, if you want lots of different modules that appear in different kind of organizational structures, you can do all of those things within reason, within all of the limitations that email has, which makes things fun. Having a custom template that is well designed and well developed will also often enable you to run literally every single email you ever build off one template. That makes updating things when things do change, and things change often, much easier. A well-designed and well-built email template as well will utilize Marketo's email syntax in a way that lets you use the in-editor functionalities exactly the way you want them and not the way you don't. So that means you can restrict WYSIWYG functionalities where you don't want people to be able to access that. You can have drop-down variables, color variables. You get a lot more functionality and flexibility there. And it also provides an opportunity for you to use My Tokens throughout your template to maximize efficiency and scalability, reduce a lot of that manual work. And that's really just a handful of things that you can do if you have a custom template. The caveat I will say is if you're going to get a custom email template created, make sure you get it done with a developer who A, knows email, and B, knows Marketo. You are far more likely to get a good result first time if you work with someone who knows both of those things. They're going to have a better idea of where module breaks should be. They're going to have a better idea of the syntax, different functionalities that maybe you won't be aware of that they think might be useful. So it's a good idea to go that way. It's also really, really hard to get total consistency between design and reality when it comes to email. And it's basically because of that 15,000 number. There is a massive range of what kind of HTML and CSS is supported or not across all of the different clients and all of the different variables we have to contend with in this environment. So one piece of advice, two options here, basically. Either it's really important to make sure that you work with a designer who understands the complexities of email. So if your designer is also your developer, that is an ideal scenario and not that uncommon. But if that's not possible, it's really important to ensure that someone who does understand the complexities of email is involved in the design process from day dot. And that's the key, because if you don't do either of those things, you will be in for a world of heartache with key business stakeholders who get emotionally invested in a design that is simply not deliverable, and then the developers and the people who are responsible for the platform become the bad guys trying to backfill and change those dreams back down to what is actually achievable, and often that's slightly less exciting to execs. So it'll save you a lot of time and heartache. But at the same time, progressive enhancement is not a bad thing. So if a feature isn't supported by 20% of your database, that doesn't mean the remaining 80% shouldn't be allowed to have that feature. It's really important, where possible, where reasonable, where feasible in terms of time restraints, the amount of investment that needs to be put into developing and testing functionalities, that you can provide progressive enhancements for those who can see them and graceful fallbacks for those who can't. Part of that is also about knowing the email client split of your database. That will help you really decide on where you do and don't focus your investments in this area. No point in focusing development on functions that aren't available for Outlook if 90% of your database uses Outlook. So, that's dev. An editor experience. I hope you liked that I went into the editor for this one. Following on pretty closely from email dev, your in-editor experience is very, very reliant on the quality of your email template and the way that it's set up. All emails are built on the same foundational basis of HTML and CSS, but every email editing tool pretty much also has its own syntax, and that syntax basically controls the in-editor functionalities that are available. Your WYSIWYG editors, your variables, your image sections, where the modules start and end, all of that stuff is controlled by Marketo syntax. Marketo syntax is pretty simple, but it's also incredibly powerful when utilized effectively. It's made up of 4 key pieces. First one is elements. That includes rich text, images, snippets, and videos. When you click into a module in email editor, this is the sort of thing you should be able to see on the right hand side. Anything that looks like those, that's an element. Variables are basically like tokens. They can be global or local. Global meaning if you set the value anywhere in the template that value exists, it will carry exactly like that. Local meaning the same value can be different within different modules. Variables can be string variables, lists, numbers, colors, booleans, HTML blocks, or images. They've got a lot of flexibility here, and there's a bunch of different cool ways that you can use those. Modules are your drag and drop sections, and again, you can customize those incredibly heavily. And containers, we don't really care about for the purposes of this. It just exists in the HTML, and it tells Marketo where your modules are, basically. So what do modules help you do? They really provide an opportunity to give you almost infinite possibilities when you are working with a giant master template and want to apply that in lots of different scenarios. So you can provide component by component breakdowns and include variables for padding to allow your users to combine very simple sections in really any way they can possibly imagine. With variable padding, they can change the distances between, they can do all sorts of fun stuff. It's really limited to their imagination. But for efficiency, you can also provide component clusters for easy drag and drop of commonly used combos, and this makes consistency much easier if you're in a situation where some of your users potentially aren't as design confident, shall we say. And it saves a lot of time, helps you maintain a lot of consistency. Plus there's some really cool things you can do with variables. So one of them, I use global variables for your UTM campaign, and I also fill that variable with a program name token, and basically for me that means I never have to populate a UTM again. Yay! We love that. I keep it as a variable so that if for any reason I do want to change it, so say I've got multiple email assets within the same program, if I want, I can go and add an appended to the end of it E01 or something, and that'll tell me it's the first email in the series. You can also change the alignment of basically anything by turning alignment into a variable. So drop down left, right, center. You can change a button to be left, center, right, and you don't have to have 3 different button modules. You can also, like I mentioned, avoid ever going into the HTML to change padding again by using numbers to control your padding. You can control the minimum, the maximum, and provide level jumps. So if you push up, it goes up by 5 or by 10, stops people from using silly numbers in those. And you can make buttons super customizable by making color variables an option as well. Stop people going into the HTML and breaking things.
Grace, can I just ask, did
Yeah.
you ever solve the custom color palette?
No, I know.
I never got to one.
Sandy gave me a very, very vague hint and then nothing else.
Yeah, I found a vague hint from him online.
Yeah.
But now developing it up, which is on maternity leave.
Yeah. I still really want it. So context for everyone. I've had a couple of conversations with Sanford Whiteman on Community, who a couple of people will know of, about creating restricted color palettes in the email editor for color variables. And he knows a way to do it, and he's a little bit secretive about it. Apparently it requires some pretty complicated in-browser JavaScript. I haven't figured it out yet, but I want to. Not yet. I know, damn it. So, key takeaways for this bit. If you are having frustrations with the email editor, the first place to start is your template, because 98% of the complaints I've ever seen about Marketo's email editor are because your template sucks. I'm sorry. There we go. You don't need to know how to code, but knowing how Marketo's email syntax works and what options it makes available to you will make it much easier for you to develop good requirements for a template, and hopefully get a better template as a result of it. And if you use the syntax effectively, there is a real chance you'll never need more than one email template, which is awesome. Massive efficiency boosts there. Did I get them all? Yes, I did. Awesome. That means we're on to testing.
Can I ask a
Yes.
question of the audience? Does everyone have templates set up that work that way?
I love mine. I spent a long time on mine. I think mine took me, because I code most of our templates in-house because I find it just easier to do it that way. I think our current one I spent at least 3 months ferreting away on, testing, screwing with stuff over Christmas. So testing, you say tomato and I say tomato. Basically, the point is not all email clients will render one email the same way. Like I said, those 15,000 different versions, this is where that comes into play. Why so many? The mail server, the preprocessor, and the rendering engine, there are a lot of moving pieces when it comes to email that you don't have to contest with when it comes to web dev. So depending on your email client, depending on your device, depending on your browser, depending on your app, depending on a ton of different things, email may look completely different for you as it does for me. So this is where testing comes in. Using a tool like Email on Acid or Litmus will help you identify issues in your email before they become customer facing. Often they'll also help you pinpoint the cause of the issue. So I've just pulled through some screenshots from over the past sort of year and a half from my Litmus account of some issues I've seen in emails that I've tested. So we've got a broken button on the left. On this one in the middle, the text isn't going the whole way through across. We've got this sort of reduced width center aligned thing that's hanging to the left instead of in the middle. This one you can see the logo and the hero image, neither of them are the same width as each other, but they're also not the same width as the text section, which is weird. That one is just a problem. Again, we've got width issues. We've also got massive alignment issues with these columns in the bottom. There are a ton of different things that you can find. And in my experience, a lot of people who are not testing their emails the first time they test it, they are a little bit horrified at the things that they have been sending to customers that they did not realize they were sending to customers. So, beyond just testing for rendering, these kinds of tools can also help you figure out a bunch of other stuff, including subject line best practice, file size and load speed, what your email looks like when the images are turned off. They'll let you do a sender detail review. They'll help you get stats on engagement and different clients that are being used by your database. And they'll also help you with spam testing, which is particularly key to what Josh is going to be talking about. And yeah, a ton more. But the real point of it is that everything that they're there to do is aimed at helping you optimize the performance of your emails. And why should you care? It is important to note that if you're not doing this right now, bringing it into your process is A, going to cost you time, B, going to cost you money. You have to pay for these platforms. They're not that expensive, but it is a cost that you're necessarily going to justify. So why should you? Number one, it's not a good look on your brand if you're sending broken emails. It's, if you're a major company, you've got thousands and thousands and thousands or millions even of customers on your database or leads on your database, and you're sending them emails that look like crap. Probably not going to buy from you. It's also important to note that identifying some of these issues early on and fixing them can be a really key step in improving your deliverability. And not just that, people are far more likely to click on an email that's not broken, funnily enough. And it keeps you up to date with best practice because keeping tabs on it helps you understand when things are changing, how they're changing, and make small course corrections when things start to go wrong, rather than massive course corrections when a molehill becomes a mountain. And like I said earlier, testing helps you catch issues before they start to impact leads or customers. Basically, it helps you amplify everything that's good about email and hopefully help bypass some of the sometimes negative side effects. Investing in it will help pay off in spades. And last up, analytics. Yay! It's like one of my favorite videos on YouTube. So, again, why does analytics matter? Why should you care about this? A, constant improvement. If you are not using past performance of your emails to help dictate changes or improvements that you're going to make for next for future campaigns, you are literally rolling the dice. There is nothing to say that any changes you make are going to be better or worse. You may roll a nat 20, you may roll a nat 1.
Okay, thank you.
Someone in the room gets it. Oh, that GIF's not supposed to disappear, but never mind. The other most important one, arguably, is business results, right? If you are not tying Marketo's impact back to measurable business results, it is really hard to fight for budget, and it's really hard to be in a room with other people who can and hold your ground. If they have an opinion that you think is wrong but you don't have the numbers, tough. So what's the first step? It's basically just to actually do something. Something in the case of analytics is always better than nothing. It is really easy to get a little bit of analysis paralysis when we come into this subject because it can seem so immensely complicated, but start small. And there are some really basic, easy things you can do in Marketo to get started on this. First one is make sure that you're including basic reports in all of your programs by default. If you have program templates, build them into your program templates. Get them in there. It's also really helpful if you add program statuses to your program performance reports. You can do that in the settings. It helps you get a much better sense of how people are flowing through your program. A lot of people don't know you can do it. And this is kind of obvious, but it's still helpful. Setting up subscriptions just sends the reports to your inbox straight away. It keeps it front of mind. You don't have to remember to go into the system to go and check those numbers. So it's a good idea for a lot of your always on big focus campaigns to set up those. That testing bit is not supposed to be there, forgot to delete it. I don't think this is updated since my last edits, but that's all good. I'll just go through these. So some of the basic reports you should definitely be using in Marketo. First one is program performance reports. Basically that's your top line stats on how people are moving through your program. Again, this is the one that you can get program statuses into if you go into the settings. Most beneficial if you are marking program statuses for success, which if you're not doing, you should definitely do. Email performance reports is basically your top line email performance summaries. You will see a list of all of the emails available in the program in there, pretty self-explanatory. Email link performance reports let you see how people are clicking on specific individual links in your programs. So can be helpful if you want to know what type of content people are engaging with more or less. Some easy mistakes you can avoid with analytics. First one is never A/B testing anything. You should be A/B testing stuff. It's good. It's great functionality. The other one though is A/B testing stuff and forgetting about statistical significance. So if you are determining success of an A/B test based on how many more people clicked on something and not whether the result was statistically significant, again, you are rolling the dice. Has to be statistically significant. And what that means, if you're not familiar with the term, is the probability with which this result happened by chance. And you don't want it to have happened by chance. You're rolling the dice. Other mistake is leaving UTM tracking off your emails or only adding it on some links. Don't do that. Sending and forgetting, trigger-based or always-on campaigns. Don't send and forget, don't activate and forget, check in with them, see how they're going, make improvements, make updates. You're missing opportunities if you're not doing that. And also you don't have to do everything from scratch. Not every email has to be completely unique, completely new. There's tons of people in your database who will never have seen that piece of content that you sent 6 months ago. Reuse stuff. It's efficient, and 98% of the time no one will notice, except you, and that's fine. And manualization over automation, which is a keyword of mine that I love to use. Basically just meaning doing things step by step by step by step repetitively when you don't have to. When you can templatize things, when you can automate them, if there's any way that you can reduce the number of manual steps in even a manual process, it's still a time benefit to you. And that is basically the circle of life. How are we going for time?
We're good.
We're good? All right, because then we've got a pop quiz. I said it would be here, I didn't lie. So, pop quiz, true or false? Our emails should always be short. Long emails don't perform well. Hands up for true. Hands up for false. Hey! I taught you well. Oh, sorry, I forget that that comes in automatically. Yes. So, long emails can actually perform really well. A long email is not inherently bad. Our enemy is not long emails, it's crap emails, basically. So just send good long emails if you're going to send long emails. Be focused on what their objective is, do it well, give things lots of space, make the flow logical. Long emails aren't bad emails. Next one is this. True or false? Putting multiple calls to action in an email is a bad idea. True? False? Sort of true. Also sort of false. It's kind of a trick question. Whoops. It is true that adding multiple calls to action can distract your user from the key objective of the email. So what the real thing is that you don't want to confuse the message. Multiple calls to action aren't necessarily bad if you're using them logically. It can make sense if they're all actually pointing to the same call to action and they're just dispersed throughout the email as someone progresses down the journey. The key thing is, again, like with long emails, you remain really clear on what the objective of the email is. But if someone comes to you and says they want to send out an email to a specific audience and they want to get this business outcome, don't let them throw a bunch of content that's completely meaningless because they think it might also be helpful to throw that in. No, distracting. True or false? You should all know this because I literally just said it. My A/B test says 50 more people opened version A, so version A wins. True? False? Ta-da!
Sort of.
I keep pushing next and I shouldn't. So maybe, maybe not. It's not the number that counts, it's the size of your p-value. Right? So A is only the winner if its outperformance is statistically significant. If it's not the winner. And we don't currently have enough information to prove that. So false. True or false? My web developer can create our email template for us. Hands up for true. Hands up for false. False, sort of. Probably not. Email dev may as well basically be a different language to web dev. And while a web developer is entirely likely to be able to pick up emails dev, so yes, depends on the web developer, it's probably going to take them a long time to get used to it, and they're probably not going to be aware of all of the catch-alls that they need to know to put VML in to do these things with Outlook. So if you're in a rush, it's better to get someone who knows what they're doing with email. True or false? If we build our whole email out of images, it will display consistently. Hands up for true. Hands up for false. Okay, I put sort of true.
Consistent.
Depends on your definition of consistent. That is very true. Technically, this is kind of true. Technically, this is why a lot of people build emails this way. My feeling is it comes a lot of the time from the top down because people want custom fonts and people want these things to always apply this way. The thing is, it generally looks a little bit shit on mobile. And if you have images turned off, as we saw earlier, it's not a great experience. So basically, just because you can, doesn't mean you should. Use your power wisely. I fixed that earlier. That's fine, ignore the little emoji. Our emails should look the same across all clients. Hands up for true. Hands up for false. False. So no, they shouldn't look the same across all clients, but they should look as good as they can on each client, given the limitations of said client. The cold, hard, uncomfortable truth is that the only way to make all of your emails look the same on everything is to make them all look a little bit shit. Sorry. And that's basically me. I've got a couple of links to some extra things that you can read if you're interested. I did a big long rant on the Champion blog recently on basically this topic. So if you want to dig into that, feel free to have a read. I've got links there and links to a couple of other articles and websites that I love for these kinds of subjects. Rant over, drop the mic.
Cool.
Except not actually. I'll just click next and pass it to Josh.
Thanks.